นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening to you all. One of the comments that people interested in Buddhism these days make is, they say there's so much information available now that it can be confusing how to practice, what to practice. Meaning that now that we have online teachings, we have videos and audio and the written word online. On the one hand, it's, you might say, a golden age where we can have access to the teachings of many different Buddhist masters, monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen, as well as the word of the Buddha himself. But there's so much, people are often not sure where to start. And then of course, two teachers who may have their own reputation may seem to contradict each other, or at least say something that doesn't quite match what one says something that the other doesn't say, or they talk about different aspects of the practice or emphasize different things based on their own experience and understanding. Even two monks who may be considered arahants can sometimes seem to talk in a different way about the Dhamma, and they may teach a different technique of meditation, emphasize one aspect over another. Or when teachers refer to the word of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha are so extensive. There's so many suttas. And then there's the Vinaya and the Abhidhamma as well. So one teacher may pick out one part of the Buddha's teachings and emphasize that, and then another teacher may pick out another part, and it may seem almost like the Buddha's words themselves don't always match up or make sense. And partly it depends on the context, doesn't it? The context that the Buddha was teaching, who he was teaching, the background of that person, the situation and their particular problem. So it may seem on one occasion he taught one thing, and then on another occasion he taught something totally different. But of course, if you study the word of the Buddha, then you'll see, well, they all fit within the framework of the Four Noble Truths, all his teachings. Say, for example, when the Buddha talked about the cause of suffering, he'd say, well, cause of suffering, what we call samudaya, is craving, tanha. So tanha, there's three types of tanha. There's kama tanha, sensual desire, sensual craving. Bhava tanha, craving to become. Vibhava tanha, craving not to become. you already have 3 different types of craving are the cause of suffering. Or you could say, well, where does craving come from? It comes from avijja, ignorance, or lack of knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. So as soon as you start asking one question already, the words of the Buddha start to expand on that and give you different aspects, different steps leading up to, say, in the question of what is suffering, what is its cause, different steps leading up to the actual experience of suffering. And craving is one way of describing the cause of suffering. Another one is asava or kilesa. It's the cause of suffering. When you look at kilesa, kilesa is mental defilements. Usually how they're translated, the word is translated. That's mental qualities or mental states that defile the mind. Take away the mind's clarity, purity, radiance. They have a defiling nature. And they're split into 3 groups. Defilements are split into the groups of greed, the group of anger, and the group of delusion. And then within all those defilements, there's, within the group of greed, say, there's sensual desire, and there's stinginess, and there's possessiveness, different kinds of greed, greed for material things, greed for immaterial things, say greed for fame and reputation, greed for states of samadhi. On and on it goes. You can divide out the kilesas into their subgroups and different mental qualities that are linked but have different names, as it were. So it may depend on what your particular interest is at one moment, what you're looking at, what you're contemplating yourself, or say the Buddha, who he was teaching at one moment. He might be talking about how to abandon greed, or how greed leads somebody maybe to do something unskillful, and the suffering it causes may lead them to steal or tell a lie or cheat on their partner or something. Or ill will, aversion or hatred leads them to do something else. Just depends who it was, who the Buddha was teaching and what the situation was. But we are receiving now the Buddha's words in the form of the Tripitaka, the books, the texts. Then even the texts, how people translate Pali, how they interpret it can vary from one translator to another or one country to another. Then we also have commentaries. Let's expand even further, but now these commentaries are written by later commentators, no longer the direct word of the Buddha, but commentaries on the word of the Buddha, explanations, and each commentator will bring in a slightly different angle and different perspective, perhaps based on their own knowledge and understanding. And it's all available now, which is good in one sense, but it's also can be a cause of confusion or uncertainty. In the time of the Buddha, there was the Kalama people who were living in one part of India, and they had a lot of faith in spiritual practice. They wanted to find out the truth and experience happiness, well-being, peace of mind. But it was, as was very common in those days, many teachers would come wandering through their towns, their villages. And each teacher had a different background, a different set of teachings and practices. They weren't all the same. So one teacher would teach them one thing, and another teacher would show up and teach them something else. So they had problems, they had confusion. Nowadays, the teachers do travel as well, but also just because of access online, it's like the wandering teachers come into our screen of our phone or our computer. So we have the same dynamic, many different teachers emphasizing different things, explaining the teachings and the practice in different ways. Each teacher may have their own reputation, and they may have students who are very determined to follow them and tell everyone how good they are, but one teacher may present the Dhamma differently from another. So the Kalamas, they talked to the Buddha and said, what shall we do? And he said, well, he sympathized with their problem and said, you have to go on your experience. You have to take what these teachers have said, but put it to the test through your practice. You warn them not just to believe the first thing you hear, just because a teacher has a good reputation. Maybe that reputation is deserved, but still, you shouldn't just go on reputation alone. Or even just if they present it well, they speak well, and it seems to make sense, seems to be logical, correct, and they have a good system of presenting their teachings. Still, we shouldn't just accept it. Or because it's just tradition handed down, shouldn't tradition just accept tradition. So the Buddha gave the Kalama people a number of ways to consider teachings that they receive, and pointed out the danger of believing too quickly and just accepting things because somebody said so. Which is rather like the internet now, isn't it? Somebody puts something on the internet, and some people will already believe it because there it is, they can read it, so it must be true. But this is not a new problem. The Kalamas had this same problem. So the Buddha encouraged them to train in yoniso manasikara, wise reflection, to give wise consideration or careful consideration to what teachings they receive, and then put them to the test, and then see the results of this experiment or this test that they do through their own experience. And if what they find from their experience matches with what the teacher says, then maybe they should accept it as true and believe it. But they should always put the teaching to the test rather than just accepting it on belief alone, so that they can get beyond their doubts and their confusions. So the Buddha was teaching about these things, looking at the origin of suffering, greed, anger, delusion, and seeing how it affects the mind, what it makes us do as human beings. Under the influence of greed, we might kill or steal or cheat on our partner, or tell lies or take intoxicants. Is that good? Is that beneficial? Does that lead to happiness or not? The Buddha was teaching them to reflect on these experiences. And they concluded, well, if you are caught into greed and then you go and kill or steal, it leads to suffering. You're suffering the suffering of others. There's consequences. So then you can conclude that the defilement, mental defilement of greed is not a good thing, something to be abandoned. And the quality of non-greed, generosity, kindness is better, because that doesn't lead to that kind of suffering. It leads to clear, peaceful states of mind. Wholesome states of mind arise when you practice non-greed. The mind is freer, in a better place, but it's accompanied by a feeling of well-being, happiness. So non-greed is something to be cultivated, greed is something to be abandoned. And this is how the Buddha taught them to reflect on their experience, but based on the teachings they received, and to reflect on the experience that they have, putting those teachings into practice until they come to their own conclusion. He also taught about the 4 Brahma Viharas, sublime abidings. So if you practice metta, goodwill, karuna, compassion, mudita, appreciative joy, upekkha, equanimity, how does that affect your mind? The quality of kindness, metta, when cultivated, purifies the mind of ill will. You can't have kindness and ill will in your mind at the same time. So one way to abandon anger or ill will is cultivate kindness. Even before you're experiencing anger, if you cultivate kindness, maybe it'll prevent ill will or anger from arising. It's not only a way to, by cultivating goodwill, it's not only a way to abandon ill will, it's also a way to prevent it from arising. And the Buddha encouraged them to reflect on the results of that. If you cultivate metta, goodwill, towards other beings, how does it feel? Well, it feels good, it brings you happiness. But that's something you have to know for yourself. It's not just something to believe in, but you have to test it through your own practice and actually get to know the quality of goodwill as opposed to the quality of ill will. Know the difference. Goodwill, kindness, metta is accompanied by a pleasant feeling, and it's a wholesome or skillful state of mind. So it helps the mind to settle down, to feel more peaceful, more at ease. Ill will is the opposite. It's hot, it agitates the mind. And that's something you have to learn through your own experience. The Buddha was encouraging the Kalama people to take teachings they get, practice with them, observe, learn, until they can conclude exactly what is what, and then maybe take on that teaching as correct, true, or follow the teacher that gives that teaching. Or if they find it's not true, not correct, then to discard it. In this day and age, well, we have to have much the same approach. You hear many teachings, read many teachings. You really have to take it away and practice with it before you can finally believe it or make a strong conclusion that it's right or wrong. The trouble with say, technology and the teachings we receive online is that we may just try a little bit, and we're always jumping to the next teacher, next teaching, so we don't really go in very deep to anything. One of the challenges in this day and age, you might say, is to learn how to stick with particular teachings, practices, long enough so that you can really prove for yourself what does work, what helps you, what is beneficial for you, for others, and what isn't. Because if you keep jumping around from one to another, well, that can only lead to more mental agitation, maybe more doubt, more confusion. And doubt is probably one of the biggest obstacles we have to overcome with, especially in the beginning of our practice. The nature of doubt, skeptical doubt, is it prevents you putting forth effort. It's one of the hindrances in developing meditation. It can manifest in many ways. Self-doubt, doubt in your own ability to practice, doubt in the effectiveness of the practice that you might be interested to try, but then the doubt comes up and says, oh, maybe this won't work, maybe it's not the right one for me, or doubt in the teacher, or the place, practice, or the technique. And it prevents you continuing with your practice, or it can paralyze you, so you're stuck. Can't go beyond the doubt. So then your mind pulls away. So if you're practicing a meditation technique, it could be, for example, the breathing. When the doubt arises, you might say, well, what purpose has this got? How can it help me? What does following the breath do for me anyway? It doesn't give me any knowledge, perhaps. You might think like that. What did anyone ever get from watching the breath? Can I watch my breath? Maybe you can't even find the feeling of your breath yet because your mind hasn't settled down. So you doubt that there's any benefit of doing it in the first place. You think this is not worth it, not worth the effort. So you give up straight away. So doubt leads you to pull back from the breath, or from making an effort to watch the breath and develop mindfulness on the breathing. So maybe you'll never experience any continuity of mindfulness, any samadhi, any joy, any peace, any clarity. You may even go away thinking, this meditation doesn't work, it's not good for me, not good for anyone else. But you also have to ask yourself, how much have I really practiced with it? Is the problem that the meditation technique or the breath itself, or is it I simply haven't put much effort into it, I haven't done it enough? And of course, when you have doubt, then your mind pulls away from what it's putting attention on, the breath, say, and then you might look around for something else to pick up in your mind, in your thinking. So if you're still interested in meditation, well, you might think, oh, I should do another different type of meditation. So you might turn to a different teacher or different technique, try this, try that. But the hindrance of doubt is still there, so perhaps you try something else for a while, and you don't give it much time, much chance, so your mind moves on to something else again. And never settles down, never goes very deep into the practice. And the Buddha encouraged us to cultivate with patience and effort, and really try, really do it sincerely before you make any conclusions, before you really know or can say that you know. And if you haven't done that yet, you have to be honest and ask yourself, well, have I done that? How much effort have I put into this practice? Before you make any decisions whether you should continue or stop. And some things that help us get over doubt, well, listening to the Dhamma does help. And often when you meet a teacher the teacher seems inspiring or correct, well, that can help. But it's not the only factor. We also have to come back and look at our own effort, in the quality of our own effort. Sometimes it's better to do a short period of meditation, but sincerely, than just say, give yourself some target and say, well, I'm going to sit meditate for an hour, but you spend the whole hour, your mind wandering around, not mindful, not concentrated. Sometimes you can try just a very short period of time, say 10 or 15 minutes. But in that time, you are sincerely putting your effort into watching the breath, getting to know the in-breath, the out-breath. In the end, quality is going to be better than quantity. You can sit for an hour, but maybe you're falling asleep or thinking of many different things and not with the breath at all. Whereas if you pick a shorter period of time, say, I'm going to sit and watch this, watch the breath, really do it for a period of time that you find doable, possible, that may bring you some clarity and some understanding. The other thing that will help is regular practice. We all know what Ajahn Chah used to say about meditating when you feel like it. You feel like it today, so you do a bit for however long, whether it's 10 minutes or 1 hour, whatever. But then tomorrow you don't feel like it, so you don't do it. Maybe you only meditate once a week or once a month or occasionally. So of course, it's not very often. So he gave the comparison with the man making fire from rubbing two sticks together. To get heat and sparks from two sticks, you have to keep rubbing until they're so hot that smoke arises and there's heat until there's a bit of spark. And if you put the sticks down, all the heat disappears from the sticks and you're back to square one. And that, meditating occasionally or when you feel like it, but not when you don't feel like it and not very often, well, it's like you keep putting the sticks down so you never get very hot. Or another one might be if you want to boil water, you put your pot on the stove and you turn the heat up, and then after a while you turn the heat off again. And you come back and it's gone cold again, you turn the heat on again. Your water never gets boiled because you keep turning the heat off. So you need some patient effort, some regular practice, and some sincerity of effort, quality of effort, if you really want to find out what it's like when you're mindful, when the breath comes up, when you're with the breath and know the breath, rather than just endlessly thinking about all the things we normally think about, because we know that anyway. We know what a mind is like, thinking about this and that, liking this, disliking that, falling asleep, wondering about this. We know that. But the mind that is mindful with an object, we don't know very well. So we have to give it time, we have to give it a chance. The reason we do that is so that we get used to turning attention to one place, to one object, and setting aside of the doubts and the worries and the desires for things and the irritation. They may arise into our awareness, but then we let them go by turning to the meditation object we do. So if it's the breath, getting to know the breath and using that as a means to let go of everything else. And if you put effort into that, you get to know the breath. You'll probably find it becomes more interesting, more enjoyable than before, because you're knowing it and because you're doing it. Because if you do it regularly, sincerely, then you'll find you become more adept at letting go of the obstacles, the other things that come up in your mind. And you have less doubt because you can see that your mindfulness is improving. And as mindfulness improves, you feel better in body and mind. You can know that for yourself. Luang Por Chah used to talk about this quality of the internal witness, Sikhi Buddho. That's the word he used. It means this quality, the inner knowing. So as you practice mindfulness more and more, and it becomes stronger, then you develop this ability to just know your body and your mind in the present moment without getting distracted. So without caught up into all the preoccupations, the imagination, the storytelling, the sleepiness, the worries, all of that normal stuff fades out and your mind is more comfortable just being with the breath. Thoughts may arise, but you see them and you let them go. So then you can really witness your experience without getting too caught up in it. So just knowing in a very pure way. It's what we call Sikhi Buddho. And then some of the other teachings that the Buddha gave become very obvious. So like you see or know thoughts arising and passing away. And you can't miss that because your mind is quiet, peaceful with the breathing. Then you can just observe thoughts arising, passing away. And you can't miss the fact that they're temporary. And then another thought arises and passes away, but it's also temporary. And the internal witness is, it's unbiased, it's not making anything out of what it sees. It's just this quality of knowing and seeing the way things are. So whether the thoughts are beautiful, impressive, intelligent, really ordinary, very random, or very ugly and very unskillful. The witness is just observing. Just like someone sitting on the side of the road observing people walking by or cars going by. And they're not getting caught up into the details of the vehicles or the people, or the scenes that they see. They're just observing what's going on. But as you observe, you observe the more common characteristics, what we say the universal characteristics, impermanence. The fact that things are impermanent, they're always changing and fading and degenerating. It's what we call dukkha. And the selfless nature of phenomena. Things arise because of their own causes and conditions. If you're really with this quality of the mind that witnesses Sikhi Buddho, You're seeing the selfless nature of your experience. Things arise, feelings arise. Based on those feelings you may have thought formations, different ideas arise. But if you keep mindful with this internal witness, the silent witness, then everything is disbanding again, disappearing again, because you're just observing rather than getting involved with them all. So you can see a thought as merely a thought, arising, passing away. Whether it's good or bad, it's a different question. What you're observing from this place of quietness is just the transient, temporary nature of thought. Feeling as well. You're observing, even if you have painful feeling, which normally stimulates some fear or aversion, if this internal witness is really clear, mindfulness is strong, even painful feelings you can just watch. Oh, it's like this, pain is merely pain, pleasure is merely pleasure. And all the time you're learning about the nature of these different phenomena, impermanent, and they're selfless because you're not identifying with them or creating a self out of them, you're just watching. So it's like there's this separation between the knower and the known. It's the body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, sense consciousness. And that changes your mind. It's changing the nature of your mind, the way your mind looks at experience. It may only be very subtly and very slowly, but it's changing your view on things because you become more familiar with seeing the way things are, the impermanent nature of thought. And you can use that to your advantage because later on thought is just a thought, so you might have a very unpleasant state of mind based on some feelings, some memory or some experience you've had, maybe very unpleasant, kind of stressful, unpleasant state of mind. But because you've done this practice before, sincerely, if only for periods of time, maybe not all the time, but you've done it before, and you've seen the temporary nature of your thoughts and feelings, well, however unpleasant it is, it still arises and passes away. A thought is merely a thought. Feeling is merely feeling. Same with pleasure. Pleasure may be good, it may be desirable, it may be something that really fills your mind and makes you very happy at that moment. But it also arises and ceases. That's its nature, because this is the nature of phenomena, and the Buddha pointed this out already. But he didn't say just believe it as a theory or just a description of reality. He said you have to develop this internal witness, the Sikhi Buddha of the mind, and see it, know it for yourself. Then that will change your experience and start to remove some of the stress and suffering from your experience. Or we say, let go. Why can your mind let go of things? Because it sees, they're not permanent, they're subject to degeneration, they're not a self, so they can be let go of. They should be let go of. Because if you cling on to something that's impermanent, you're always going to be suffering. Clinging implies clinging with some delusion, with a sense of self. Like you're holding on to something you can't hold on to. You could try it, just test it. When you are a little bit more mindful in your meditation, try and hold on to a thought. Keep it there. How long can you keep a thought in your mind? It just dissolves, doesn't it? As soon as you touch it, it dissolves. It's like a bubble on water or something. You touch it and it pops or it disappears straight away. It doesn't last. But you could try, just to prove it to yourself. Try and hold one thought, one emotion in your mind all the time while you're meditating. Really study it. It doesn't last, does it? It disappears on you. So you're actually getting familiar or used to watching things disappear as you do this. And that can help you to understand the world better, because you realize, oh, everything we're involved with eventually will disappear. Even things that seem very solid and long-lasting disappear on you, don't they? You can't keep any material possession forever. You can't keep the people you love forever. A thought in your mind, a feeling you can't keep forever. So you become more used to seeing that, the changing nature of your experience. And you're used to the fact that you will separate from everything you love and like. Suffering comes when we can't accept that truth. We try to cling on to everything we love and like. We want more of it and we want to hold on to it and keep it. But we can't. And the Buddha didn't say we can't experience any pleasure or love or happiness. But we have to see that these are conditioned states of mind that arise and cease. And this body that we experience the world also arises and ceases. One day we won't be here. I won't be here. You won't be here. We'll be gone. That's the truth. And the more we develop this mindfulness and contemplate, the more we can recognize that in our experience. And that allows the mind just to release, let go of its craving and attachment, the causes of suffering. Then we can say, oh, what the Buddha taught is true, or what Ajahn Chah taught is true. It's no longer just believing it. You may begin on that level, you have to start somewhere, but you actually see it or know it through your experience. So if you've experienced that for yourself, you say, oh yes, I know what the Buddha was talking about now. Then maybe you go back and you're exposed to all these different teachings, different techniques, and you can see, well, what works and what doesn't, what's in line with what the Buddha taught, what's not. Because you now have your own internal witness. And this internal witness is something that's very clear and unconfused, undistracted, not easily affected by the world. So that it doesn't matter so much if you hear different teachings or read different teachings or meet different teachers, then you've got a basis somewhere that you can compare your experience with what that teacher maybe is saying. And they may be saying very good things and correct things, or they may be not. But you have a way of comparing now and learning and knowing for yourself. So the Buddha was encouraging that. He was encouraging us to learn from our experience, not just to believe or accept too easily, but to put things to the test. And he praised people. So like the very first teaching he gave, Dhammacakka Sutta, when Kondanya realized the first level of enlightenment, it became a stream enterer. He saw the impermanent or transient nature of these five khandhas, body, feelings, thoughts. You can see these are constantly changing phenomena. He saw that, so then the Buddha says, oh, Kondanya knows now. Anya Kondanya. It's not Kalyano believes, it's Kalyano knows, because Kalyano had actually practiced to the point where he could see what the Buddha was pointing to in his own experience. So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight.